Hello, Iroro.
Hi, Vivian.
Hello, Iroro. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. And how are you?
Very well, thank you. And good to have you on the show.
Well, thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
By the way, how's the weather over there?
Oh, it's a lovely day outside. It's sunny and
Yeah,
really
yeah, I can see the rays coming in from the window.
yeah.
All right, now a quick one. Let's get to know you. If you would just introduce yourself in view of what we will be discussing on the show.
Right. So I am a lecturer at the University of Benin, but currently doing my PhD in biology at Texas Tech University, Lubbock, Texas, in the U.S. I study bats, and I've been doing this for the past 4 years in Nigeria, in forest and in caves in Nigeria.
Now, in view of the Ebola virus, how would you define the species, or rather, how would you define a bat? Is it a mammal? Is it a bird?
Right.
How
So
would you define it?
Right. So bats are flying mammals, and they're not birds, as some people would think. Essentially, they also provide many ecosystem services like pollinating flowers, dispersing seeds, and at least about 80% of bats would feed on insects, which are important for agriculture which is important for agriculture because it would manage insect pest populations.
Now, during the period of this epidemic, the media has been awash with messages linking bats to Ebola, that bats are able to transmit the virus to human beings. How true is this?
Right. So, yes, there is evidence that bats carry viruses, and they are known reservoirs for many viruses like rabies, Ebola, and Marburg virus, for example. But very little is known, and this is the subject of increasing research. But yes, viruses can be transmitted from bats to humans.
So, what is the relationship between the virus and bats, the deadly virus and bats?
Right. So, bats, a number of bat species have been reported to carry the Ebola virus. At least three of them, the hammer-headed fruit bats, the Franquet's collated fruit bat, and the little collared fruit bat, are known to carry the virus, the Ebola virus.
All right. So now, question is: there are large colonies of bats roosting in many towns and cities. How big is the risk of humans catching the virus from such bats?
Right. So essentially, the large colonies you mentioned, which I'm happy you did because there are large colonies all over the place in Nigeria. The large colonies you mentioned, most times what we know as the straw-colored fruit bats, they are not known to be very virulent, if you like. Very little level, a very low level of infection rates in that species. But the three species that we do know do not roost in such large colonies in cities like you have described. So I would say that the risk of getting the virus from those large colonies is fairly low, really low.
Question is there available scientific information that supports or advises against the reduction of bat population as a control measure for Ebola? Because given the high fatality rate of this virus, mass hysteria has led to suggestion about reducing bat populations in many cities.
Right. So the suggestions, that bat populations should be reduced is poorly advised because we know from scientific literature that in areas, for instance, in Uganda, where bat populations have been exterminated because of this virus, there has been a reemergence of Marburg virus, which is a sister species to Ebola virus. It's quite nearly as
There is a
virulent.
sister species of the Ebola virus, did you
Yes,
say?
there is. Yes. So it's called Marburg virus. And in Uganda, this had infected tourists and miners at a cave in Uganda at some point, 2007, 2008. And then they tried to exterminate the bats at that cave, and 4 years later, 2012, there was a reemergence, and this time it was even much more worse than it was before. Whereas in the previous cases, it was just a couple of, or 2 and 6 and 4 cases, but in this new case, it became 15 cases. So really, reemergence can occur when bat populations attempts to exterminate bat populations happen.
So as a professional, what do you advise as an appropriate response to Ebola with respect to bats?
Well, from the scientific evidence, we do know that culling or reducing bat populations is not a wise decision, and places or cities where this has been, attempts have been made, like in Kaduna and in Kano and in Ogun State, this is culling-informed decision, and the advice would be to stay away from bats. Do not eat bats as much as possible. Do not eat bats. Do not try to capture them by yourself. When scientists work in the field, they usually have such very heavy protective equipment when they handle bats, and this should be the approach. Do not try to disperse bat colonies. Do not try to exterminate bats, because sometimes, as we see from the Uganda case, it can lead to a re-emergence of the outbreak, which is why efforts like those of the Lagos State government is really commendable, because Governor Fashola himself said that we cannot just go out there to exterminate bats because they provide many ecosystem services, and we need to base our efforts on research. This is the approach, basically.
On a final note, I would want to ask you to kindly share with us some, roles of the bats or bats in our environment. Do they have economic value?
Right. So bats, like I said at the beginning, play many ecosystem roles. So they will pollinate flowers of many tree species, which are economically important. Some of them are timber, some of them perhaps useful by local people as food and all that kind of a thing. And then, very importantly, they also disperse the seeds of these trees. For instance, things like shea butter, which is commonly used by most people in Nigeria, rioyo, that's as locally referred to as, is the seed of shea butter is dispersed by bats. And we have things like the common locust beans, actually, is also pollinated. The flower of locust beans is pollinated by bats. So that's another important economic reason. But,
sorry, Iroro, when you talk about locust beans, what readily comes to mind is what we know locally as Iru. Is that it?
Dawa, yes, absolutely, yes.
Okay.
The flower is pollinated by bats, and it's a very interesting relationship. I shouldn't go into it, but if you know how bats do this pollination, it's really fantastic. And this is one important way that you should know, important role that bats play, basically. But another very critical, important role is that at least about 80% of the bats that we currently know feed on insects, and as we know, insects would attack, sometimes insect pests would attack agricultural crops, and this obviously is a problem. So farmers would have a problem if they have more insect infestation, and bats in their own way minimize such insect pests. So that's a very important economic role that they play.
It's been wonderful having you on the show. I really, I'm grateful. I've had this talk with you. Before now, I never knew bats had economic value in any way. So having heard this, my understanding about bats as it relates to Ebola has changed. And I'm very sure viewers also will be leaving this show with better informed mindset about all of this. Thank you once again, Iroro.
Thanks, Vivian. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
And we look forward to having you back again.
Oh, absolutely. It will be a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, then. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.